Out of the many, many interesting things about compost, did you know it's actually not supposed to smell that bad? Of course, if you were to put your head in a compost bin and get a real waft of it, you probably notice some choice fragrances. However, it's not supposed to smell from more than a meter away. So I knew something had gone dreadfully wrong when I came out last night and it smelled like everyone in the world had at the same time done a giant shit in my face. The culprit was clear. This compost bin. The problem was obvious from the beginning. Without even opening it, I knew there was going to be a horrific surprise inside. So it is time to fix this situation. We're going to balance out the compost with some coir bricks. And of course, to open those coir bricks, we need the subject of today's knife review, the Aurora knife and tool, Truffles. So maggots, are they a terrible problem? Not really. They are obviously an indicator of bioactivity, which is what you want in your compost. The only thing that would really kill compost is you end up with household cleaners or something in it, or if you have it far, far too hot by leaving it in the direct sunlight and putting lots of high anaerobic activity stuff like grass clippings in there. That can absolutely boil anything alive inside your compost, which is sometimes what you want if you're composting like your own shit or something like that. That's what you need to kill lots of the bugs that then mean the soil that you end up with can be used safely on your garden. However, the compost I'm using, not too bothered about that. However, what I did do with this batch was put a big old watery heaping of chicken crap in there. And I'm not intending on using this compost for about a year, so that will all sort of go returning to the earth styles. And I'm mainly going to use this compost on my trees, like my fruit trees and stuff. I'm not going to be using it on veggies that I'm pulling out of it directly, so to speak. So not a huge issue regardless, but what I've definitely done here is caused indicator pests. So maggots are indicator pests for too much water and too much organics and not enough just neutral bedding. You reckon? It's there. It's one for you, huh? You think? Is that for you? You think, hey? The other day I also had potworms, which are a sign. What I had done is quite obvious. I had all my grapefruits that I didn't use. They'd all sort of fallen off the tree. All still obviously pretty acidic. I mulched them, composted them, put them all in the one bin, and it made way too much acid, and potworms just went crazy. They're the really thin little thready white worms. So I had loads of them as well. So maggots, whilst not the end of the world, they are generally going to accompany a very stinky compost bin. So this blanket of coir soil that I'm putting on the top should suffocate that smell a little bit, keep everything toned down a bit, give the earthworms somewhere to rise up and sleep in. Earthworms love to rest and bed down in the coir stuff. And then they can eat the food that goes above and also the stuff that's below. Need to kind of cool it on these compost bins. I think I'm getting a little bit too excited, putting a little bit too much in them. Probably need to dial back the water as well. What did happen the other night, I left them open to air out, and then it rained quite heavily and they all got sort of pretty waterlogged, which also can throw them off just a little bit from time to time. So I ordered the Aurora knife and tools Truffles from the Kickstarter. This can be somewhat of a risky endeavor. In the past, knife Kickstarters have ranged in success from very, very good to very, very bad.
I do not like knives. However, this item is necessary for all the inhabitants of the modern world. Creating a cyber device was my dream. And a year ago...
And sometimes they just take your money and never send you anything. But the Truffles had a couple of things going for it. First of all, it had a bit of extra trust in the name that was making the knife. So Mike over at Misheard Knife Reviews has been out and about in the knife community for a long, long time. He knows many, many people from all different angles in the knife world. So it was far less likely that he was going to pull a Balzano on us. Also, the knife had some pretty interesting looking features. It's a knife that doesn't really look like many other knives, whilst having features you've seen individually on other more typical knives perhaps. Tanto, spanto type blades, long exaggerating opening holes. Interesting locking mechanisms, titanium handles with, quite a flanged end. It's got, a whole bunch of elements that have all sort of been thrown together. And let's just talk, I suppose, in this review about how successful that endeavor has been. You will pay $200 US for your Truffles knife. For that you get titanium handles. S35 VN for your blade steel. An interesting button lock style knife release. A rearward flipper and a front flipper. A pocket clip. And various cute accoutrements that come with the knife when you open it, that I think I threw out. I don't keep any of that stuff. Sorry. As you may be able to tell from it in my hand, it's definitely not a small knife. Let's look at it next to some other blades. Here is the Truffles with the Paramilitary 3, or the Para 3 above it, and the Paramilitary 2 below it. It's a PM2 size knife. Here it is with the TRM Atom above it, and the Almar Eagle below it. Here it is with the Buck 110 above it. Here it is with the Buck 110, the TRM Atom, then this knife, then the Paramilitary 2, to give you some idea of spine thickness. About the same spine thickness as the 110, a little bit thinner than the Paramilitary 2, and a little bit thicker than the Atom. All right, so let's talk about sharpening and care of the knife, because that's probably going to be the main point that people are going to struggle with a little bit. You see, when you have a blade like this, you are inevitably going to have to sharpen it at some point, whether you are barely using it or just using it as like a hobby style, collecting sort of knife. Maybe you will never need to sharpen it. And, I get how knife guys are. Some knives you literally just play with on the couch, and you might cut a couple of opportune things and that's it. And maybe this is what that knife is for. Like maybe this is, a toy knife sort of thing. More, no, I don't mean that in a bad way, but more of a collector piece or whatever. So that's probably not going to be a concern to you. But I like to tackle things as if it's going to be my worker knife. And so as such, it's been my worker knife. It's needed sharpening. So to sharpen this guy, it's not the end of the world, but you're going to need an extra step because you want to try and maintain this point here. So what you can do is, I'm going to show you sharpening stones first, because I think that's what most people have a version of, is sharpening stones. Whether it's the exact set that I have, or whether it's just some simpler ones, or some Spyderco stone, or whatever you've got, you're going to have the same sort of rough table sharpening experience with it. And that is that you're going to be sharpening this edge first, and then you have to revisit, and usually in sequence, or maybe you'll come back and redo the whole cycle again with this edge. So this edge here is like a little bellied tanto tip. It's like sharpening another very small knife. This part here, piece of piss, super easy, back and forward, no worries at all. Luckily, it was a dead flat edge. Sometimes these are sometimes super straight knives, or knives with flat edges. When you put them on a surface, you can see an air gap, and this one luckily didn't have that, because that's a bit more of a stock removal sort of situation. So yeah, you're going to be whetstone sharpening kind of twice as much, so to speak, or you're going to be thinking about it a bit more. That might put some people off of sharpening it, and might just get you to send it to a professional sharpener or something. But yeah, it can be done, as I'll show you on the screen now. This is how I did it. I just did a 3-stepper on my Kuramakus, from 320 to 1000 to then the 2000 Sharpening glass, and took a little bit of time, a little bit of extra attention, really paying attention to not losing that little extra sort of tanto tip, because that's definitely a feature of the blade. Look, this isn't a bad blade shape. It's actually a pretty useful blade shape, but one of the considerations is that for this extra bit of style, or maybe arguably a bit of function with that little that tip for scoring, and for cutting into tape without cutting into the package, that's the stuff, not bad. but you are going to do this little extra round of like the belly sharpen part, which can be a little bit of a learning curve. So on my sharpening stones, and I'm not the best sharpening stone guy in the world, I could get it pretty sharp, like 7 out of 10 sharp. And obviously with more time and with a full sequence of sharpening I could, but what I knew I was going to do was use my work sharp Ken Onion blade grinder to actually sharpen it for myself. So that makes it much easier. You can literally just flat edge it and then stop nice and neatly at the corner of the belt on this little tip portion here, and then a couple of quick passes on this belly part here, and the knife was pretty much, it was good to go. So 3-step process there, pretty much. Changed the belt a couple of times. I went coarse, fine, strop. I missed out the medium because my medium belt is a little bit chewed up at the moment. And it did absolutely fine. And now it's a very, very sharp knife again. So just from a maintenance point of view, it is certainly a consideration. That being said, it brings me to like the overall point of the knife maybe, and maybe it isn't for guys like me to take it on their farms and dull it once every couple of weeks. Maybe it is for just that more not fashion, but more trend crowd in the knife world, where you're after the latest iteration of, the whatever looks like the Koenig Arius of the day from, those, the knives that look like this. The knives that look like this. It's, the knives that are a bit more on the cutting edge of style choices and whatnot. All right, so as for the knife review part, look, the best things about the knife are that it is a very unique look, design. Even the lock is pretty unique. And that is pretty much what most people will want. That's their goal. I want a nice, new, unique knife that doesn't look a great deal like any of my other knives, that has a cool new lock on it. So that's probably mission accomplished for a lot of folks. Just going to get a gate here. The knife cuts exceptionally well. It's got a really good hollow grind on it. It cuts very similarly to, dare I say, the Buck 110. It's got a blade of about the same stock with a pretty decisive hollow grind that comes down to really nice thin behind the edge blade. So really, really happy with that as well. Hard hose. The lock is very fun to play with. In fact, it's mechanically a very, very excellently put together knife. Like it's quite intelligent, a little lock design. You can see, I'm sure it's quite simple and just one of those aha moments when they saw it happen. But overall, very, very cool little blade with a very cool lock. And cool is, as I said, a lot of what this is all about to a lot of people, right? A couple of points if you're going to take it out and use it like a farmer, like I did for this review period, right? So I would probably, as cool as lock is, it's going to be a little bit of a dust magnet and a crud magnet. You can absolutely open the knife up and clean it out, no worries at all. But I sort of generally steer towards just very simple lockback style knives or folding knives for like harder working knives. And again, maybe I'm wasting my time talking about this as a harder working knife because it might just be more of a fun piece, no worries at all. The main thing I come across was that when I would get into sort of harder use circumstances with the knife, I would often push the button by accident on the side. It's very accessible, very out there. That is a good thing too, but when you really sort of are going hard on some, big bags of manure or something like that, or you're cutting through like thick cardboard, and you might change your grip a couple of times, maybe you'll sort of move into a pinch grip somehow, you can disengage the lock. I was never in any danger. The flipper obviously stopped it from doing anything to me, but yeah, just something. Again, I gradually formed the opinion while using this knife that it is not really for like, your daily every job sort of thing. It's a good knife. It's very well made. It looks, whether this looks to your taste or not, so be it, but very well assembled, very well put together, and a unique design. And it's so much better than just the next, what was that thing I had from Sevivi? I can't even remember it. The Primordial, the Primatrox. You get a million of those new knives coming out every day. So something unique, something cool, something different, right? But yeah, if it comes to the crunch of like, is this going to compete with my Spyderco Stretch? Or is it going to compete with like my TRM Atom even? Like much simpler knives, much more boring knives. My Almar Falcon, Almar Eagles, much more boring knives than these. Then no, it's not. It's just a different role entirely, because this has a bit too much of that jazz going on to make it a rugged, hard user. So And again, it might be a silly thing to even comment too hard on because it probably wasn't intended to ever be that as well. Design-wise, not to my taste personally. These are things that I knew before I got it. I just wanted to support the project. I love the mechanics of the knife. The looks of the knife, on the other hand, just never got on board with long, stylistic holes in the blades. I think the Koenig Arius being as successful as it was, it's kind of like that the BMW grill joke that keeps going on. You know, it's like it starts off with a little longer hole, and then by the end of it, it's just like the entire knife is just a giant hole kind of thing. So yeah, that's never really been to my taste. Everything else about the knife I think is pretty cool. I've mentioned about the blade and the sharpening. The blade has its pros and also its sharpening cons, I suppose, or things to get your head around. But yeah, overall, very, very nice knife indeed. The only thing I wouldn't have worried about, like, you make this knife again, if I was to send him back to the drawing board, I would say do everything that you wanted to do the same. Like, you know, don't change anything because this is your knife and it's a very successful knife at being that fun, you know, entertaining piece. You know, the bit of pocket sort of fidget enjoyment. All I would do is consider whether it needed a front flipper or not, because the front flipper doesn't quite make sense on this knife. I've got a big callus from edge testing, but the front flipper doesn't quite make sense because the back flipper gets in the way. And I think on a knife, you're either going to do a front flipper or a back flipper. Don't worry about doing both. That's the only advice I'd say, because I think it doesn't really detract from the knife, but it's just a bit of a useless feature because I don't think anyone's ever going to choose to open it like that, because the flipper, you got to move your finger to get it out the way of the flipper on the back, so you're already holding it a bit weird, and you're cranking it open. I've tried to get the muscle memory down for it just over the time of review. It's just never taken on, so I wouldn't worry about doing two flipping mechanisms from that point onwards. And then even some would say that the opening hole is so you can, you know, manually open it. You know, so if you're going down that sort of, if you want to have a big specced out list of features, a bit like how, you know, you want to beef up the knife, yeah, you can say, oh, it's got 3 opening methods, but just have one really good one, which already is here, the flipper. And to be honest, even just pushing the lock and wristing the knife open, that's another. So you actually got 4 opening mechanisms. 2, I would say, are actually, you know, likely to be used in the day-to-day by the end user. So there we are. Look, certainly not a bad review, certainly not a bad knife. Actually, quite a good knife if that is what you're after. If you're after a knife that does this, by being, you know, very cool, very cutting edge, new look, you know, stylistically quite different, then yeah, absolutely buy with confidence. It's really well made. But yeah, I can't look at things. I'm too iron-headed about pragmatism and practicality to look at things and be like, well, can I use it like my Spyderco Stretch? And the answer is, I don't think I can. So that's it. Covered everything. If you're interested in a Truffles, you can get the new black-handled one, which I think looks a lot better again. You know, something to be said for the overrunning of the market with, you know, plain titanium and steel and satin steel. So the black version looks much, much cooler, I think. So that is, I think, on the Truffles Kickstarter. I'll put a link down below if you're interested. This has not been a sponsored video at all. I just bought this knife with my own money just to get on board with it and see how it was. And I don't regret it. It's certainly staying in my collection. Just an interesting piece, and it is very, very fun to just sit around and play with on the couch. That is for sure. And when you do need to cut something, by gum, it does cut really, really well. So isn't that, I guess, what it's all about in a way as well? So, all right, guys, thank you, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.
Truffles knife. The compound grind makes for one good slice. Made by a man called Michael, and like the John Travolta movie also called Michael, he's an angel of the knife that can run into a bull with minimal damage. I see him do it. Play with it on the couch, play with it in the car, play with it at the playground, play with it at the courthouse, play with it till the police come, then try and play with the policeman's gun, then play with it at the hospital. The Truffles is fun and makes life much better. Even if you have serious internal injuries, all you need is your hand, a button, and the Truffles knife. Truffles knife. All you need is your hand and Michael and the Truffles knife. Truffles knife. Truffles knife.
Well, there you have it, guys. We've learned a lot today. We've learned about the Truffles knife. We've learned about composting, acidity balance in soil. We've learned about potworms. And if you want to learn more, you can click this video here. This is what YouTube thinks you'll like. Click this video here. This is what I think you'll like. And also subscribe and like the film. Thank you so much. Goodbye.